This episode is brought to you by Casamigos Tequila. What do you bring to a holiday party? Simple, a bottle of Casamigos. Because nothing gets the party started like a Casamigos margarita, which isn't just for summer. In fact, it's the perfect pour all year round. Casamigos is the gift that always feels right, because anything goes with my Casamigos. Please drink responsibly. Imported by Casamigos Spirits Company, White Plains, New York. Casamigos Tequila, 40% alcohol by volume.
Abercrombie Kids is bringing the cheer all holiday season. And winter break means it's time for new outfits that are both festive and comfy. The last thing they need? New cozy coats for every occasion. Celebrate the season with Abercrombie Kids in the app, online, and in stores.
I am Nicole Khalil, and you're listening to the This Is Woman's Work podcast, where together we're redefining what it means, what it looks and feels like to be doing woman's work in the world today. And today, we're going to talk about listening. And yes, I'm fully aware of the irony, but of all the skills we're losing at an alarming rate, listening might be the most endangered. And I'm not talking about how our kids never listen or how certain people in our lives seem to have selective hearing. I'm talking about real deep listening, the kind where you engage with not just your ears, but your brain, your body, your heart, and your energy, where you don't interrupt or internally rehearse your response, where you don't try to fix or prove or win, where the other person actually feels heard and seen. Because one of the things that people want most is to feel understood, and most of us don't. Maybe because we've never been taught how to really listen, or we don't value it, or we're too busy talking, scrolling, or mentally replying to emails while somebody tries to tell us something deeply personal. In my opinion, it's the reason why so many of us feel lonely, disconnected, and divided. We're technically more connected than ever, and somehow feel more isolated. We have more access to information than ever before, and somehow less common ground. We live in a culture that prioritizes talking over listening, debating over understanding, and charisma over empathy. We fill space with words. We try to convince, correct, or bulldoze rather than asking genuine questions, practicing curiosity, or shutting our pie holes long enough to actually listen to someone else. And it scares the absolute shit out of me. So today we're going to learn how to listen. And then we're going to practice with each other, with our kids, and with the people we disagree with. Because I believe it's essential to our mental, emotional, and spiritual health, maybe even our survival. And there's no one better to guide us through the how than today's guest. Emily Kasriel has had a distinguished career at the BBC for over 2 decades as an award-winning journalist, editor, and media exec. But what brought her to this conversation is her deep commitment to, deep listening. She's developed the deep listening approach as a senior visiting research fellow at King's College Policy Institute in London, blending research with real-world experience as an accredited executive coach and workplace mediator. Her new book, Deep Listening: Transform Your Relationships with Family, Friends, and Foes, gets to the heart of what so many of us are missing and craving in our relationships today. Emily, thank you for being our guest, and I'm going to start by practicing my own listening skills right now and ask you to share some of the learnings from your study of over 1,000 people across 119 countries. So what have you learned about deep listening?
Well, I think that a lot of people feel quite hesitant to really listen. They don't know how, and especially if people feel differently. So for this big project, we recruited people from all over the world, and the top 4 countries represented, just to give you a sense, were Malaysia, the UK, New Zealand, and Iran. A friend of mine runs the BBC Persian service, so helped recruit those people. And so it was a really diverse bunch of people. But we found that when they learned how to deeply listen, and this was compared to a control group because we work with academics, that people felt more open, more connected, and more able to re-examine their own attitudes, which was really exciting.
It kind of plays to this belief that I think many of us have that if we want to receive something, the best way to do that is to give it, right? So if we practice deep listening, what I'm hearing you say is the outcome is that we feel more open to share and to be authentic and transparent in our communication when we practice deep listening. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, I think the very process of being curious about someone else's story, because so often we just assume that we already know, so we just preload our verbal gun with ammunition ready to fire rather than being truly open. But when we do step back and we honestly and authentically listen to them with a curiosity to understand, they say things which increase our empathy and we feel more connected to them because we understand them more fully.
Okay. So I guess share with us what the difference is between deep listening and what we're probably doing in our day to day lives.
Well, so many of us do lip service listening, even if, for example, we might have been on active listening courses. So I listen to you and say, yeah, I get it. I understand. So let me maybe pick up one word of what you said. Yeah, I get it. And now let me tell you let me help you. Let me fix you, as you said earlier. Let me solve your problem for you, especially with our kids. We like to think that that's our role, to solve their problem. We aren't really taking on board not only what the other person is saying, but also their feelings and what they are not saying, but they're communicating to us. If only we could truly listen. If one way to think about it, and this is something that Theodore Reich came up with, who is a student of Sigmund Freud, he said we can listen with our third ear. And I like to think of our third ear being somewhat, near our heart. So we're not just listening with our intellectual brain, but we're intuiting what's really going on for the other person. And then, after leaving an appropriate degree of silence, we have a go at summing up the essential core of what the person has said, what they have not said, and also of their emotions. And we offer it back with humility. So I don't say, Nicole, oh, I get it. What you're saying is A, B, and C. We rather say, I'm sensing that for you, this interview is something you've half done all the time, and yet it's a slightly different interview in the space of listening. Is that right?
Okay. So you mentioned the word silence. And I think that that's hard for many of us. I'll be transparent. I often find listening, but thinking about how to respond or what I'm going to say. And that to me is one of my biggest barriers to deeply listening. How do we practice allowing for silence? How do we, I don't know if leverage is the right word, but how do we get comfortable with silence and what part does it play in deep listening?
Silence plays a huge part. As somebody who used to be a serial interrupter, and at many times, especially when I feel so strongly that I'm right, is still an interrupter, silence is truly hard. And many of us also fear an awkward silence. We feel we're helping someone by completing their sentence for them, by filling in the gaps, by helping them to articulate something that they're struggling for words. But in doing so, what we're effectively saying is what I'm about to say is more important than what you're about to think. Because when we give people a rich, spacious silence, we give them the space to unfold new thoughts. And that what feels really inspiring. Because if you're able to be empathetic and warm-hearted and give somebody what Carl Rogers, who's a fantastic psychologist born at the beginning of the 20th century in the US, called an unconditional positive regard. And that means, I should say, for their personhood, not necessarily for their beliefs. We do not have to agree with them, but we can still respect their right to hold these ideas.
Mm. That, like, I actually kind of brought tears to my eyes. It feels very beautiful and respectful and kind to listen in a way that creates space for people. And I appreciate so much that you said that that doesn't necessarily mean that we need to agree with them, but allowing somebody to exist, unfold, as you said. I mean, what an honor that is for them and for ourselves. Okay. So then that leads me to the how to part of deep listening. I know you have an 8-step process, and I think that would be hugely beneficial to me. And I'm sure everybody listening in, because it's not a skill we're taught? Well, we're taught listening, but often badly, right? Like, as you mentioned earlier, we're initially taught by our parents who feel like the role is to advise, fix, solve, care for. And then we're taught it in, gosh, there are lots of bad ways it's being taught. How do we listen?
You're quite right. In fact, if you think of a kid in the first year at school, their teacher says, listen to me. And what she actually means is obey me. Put your pencils away, be quiet. And that's why so many of us fear listening, because we think we have to obey once we listen. But to go back to the 8 steps, the first one is about creating space. So that means psychological safety. If somebody's not feeling safe, if you're an open plan office and you want one of your colleagues to explain why they're so late every day, open plan, not such a good idea. Nature, far better, or go for a walk. But it's also thinking about the physical surroundings, so that if somebody's a bit hard of hearing, a wood is much better, material surroundings, which is why a posh restaurant works better than a cheap, noisy cafe, so that place that somebody's comfortable, both physically and emotionally, and maybe even cherished, which is why I spent time with Japanese tea ceremony practitioners. So they would move as I'm holding this mug in front of me. They move the mug to the exact position. So the most beautiful picture is to point to you. Everything is done with intention for the speaker. The second step is listening to yourself first, because if you're about to have a difficult conversation with somebody or talk to somebody who feels very differently, you first of all take the time out to say, what's really going on here? What am I projecting? Which are the characters in my shadows, in my past, am I projecting onto the person, getting in the way? And what's my real agenda? And wouldn't it be wonderful to actually think if perhaps the relationship is more important than proving that I'm right? Third step is about being present, because so often we're distracted by our phone. We know how much money is being put into getting phones to distract us and with notifications. And it's not just external distractions like phones and noise, it's also what's going on in our own mind. So giving us a little time just for a few breaths before those important conversations to become present. And that's what helps, as you were saying earlier, that honor of being able to truly let somebody else's thoughts unfold. We need to be present so they can be present. So the fourth step is about the qualities. We talked about curiosity, not assuming we already understand. And through that gateway of curiosity, we can lead to more empathy, more respect, and then being aware of our judgments and letting them go. We need judgments. If we didn't have judgments, we couldn't tell friend from foe, but we need to be aware of our judgments so we can move beyond them. The fifth step is the gaze. So unless you're somebody from the First Nation community trying to listen to an elder where it's not respectful to look, there's so much power in a gaze. And we're not talking like the French philosopher talked about, the gaze in which prison officers would look at prisoners and be able to control them. We're talking about a warm, empathetic gaze. Often when I'm coaching people and I'm able to look them in the eye, they then will go on a journey, a silent journey. They will often look up, right, as they think new thoughts, but knowing I'm staying with them, they'll go on a richer journey and then return to look at me, and our gaze window will be reestablished. And that is very beautiful. And step 6 is silence. And there's like 9 different types of silence. The poet Paul Goodman wrote and actually did an illustration in my book about these 9 different types. There's the awkward silence, there's the animal ferocity face silence, there's also a companionable silence. There's different types of silence, and it's the same about the gaze. It's the more warm, empathetic silence we want to try and embody. And in fact, recent research showed in a paper called Silence is Golden that even in negotiations, when both parties were using silence, they came up with many more creative win-win solutions rather than the zero sum. If I win, you lose. And the reason being, with silence, we can drop our blood pressure. Our heartbeat is able to drop. Our level of stress drops. So we're more in a state to be able to listen and be open to somebody else. And then step 7 is about reflecting back. And I was talking earlier about the words, the emotion, what lies between. And step 8 is about the deeper narrative. Go deeper. What's really going on for the other person? What are their needs that they're not even expressing or feeling they're allowed to feel? And what are their values? And if we can respect those things, they can come to a state of uncovering a different layer of their own story and perhaps feel brave enough to step inside a new story.
If you're anything like me, drinking enough water every day sounds great in theory, right up there with getting 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep and folding the laundry right away, which is why I found a smarter way to stay hydrated with Cure. Cure hydration packs are clean and simple, plant-based electrolytes, no added sugar, and just 25 calories. They hydrate better than water alone, and get this, they actually taste good. My favorite flavor is lemonade, but they have several great flavors that you can try, which make drinking water feel like less of a chore. They even have a Cure Hydration variety pack for kids. JJ uses them over long practices or tournament weekends, and honestly, I use them then too, because hauling kids around to all of their activities should qualify as a sport. Listen, staying hydrated isn't just about water. You also need electrolytes. That's why I love Cure. It's clean, tastes great, and actually works. And for This Is Woman's Work listeners, you can get 20% off your first order at curehydration.com/woman's work with code Woman's Work. And if you get a post-purchase survey, make sure to let them know you heard about Cure right here. It really helps support the show. Don't just drink more water, upgrade it with Cure.
This is Jason Momoa, and I'll be your finance professor today. Welcome to Banking Smarter 101 with Chime. Bam! First lesson, sign up for Chime and set up direct deposit. You'll be joining millions of members banking fee-free. Second lesson, get cash back on eligible purchases while building credit and a higher APY on your savings. That's how you bank smarter this season. Fa-la-la-la-la, class dismissed. Join Chime today.
Chime is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services and a secure Chime Visa credit card provided by the Bancorp Bank N.A. or Stride Bank N.A. Members FDIC. Optional services and products may have fees or charges. Details at chime.com/fees-info. With a qualifying direct deposit, earn 1.5% cash back on eligible secure Chime Visa credit card purchases. On-time payment history may have a positive impact on your credit score. Results may vary. APY means annual percentage yield. Learn about credit building and more at chime.com.
No one should have to choose between their own safety and their pets. But nearly half of domestic abuse survivors delay leaving because they can't bring their pets with them. Purina is helping to create more pet-friendly domestic violence shelters through the Purple Leash Project, so survivors and their pets can escape and heal together. Visit Purina.com/purple to learn more.
I mean, that was a masterclass. And I feel like every one of the 8, I could recognize where I have opportunities to do and be better. And, I think we often learn best through experience and observation. So I'd love to maybe see if you could demonstrate this for us. But before we do that, I think the one thing that will be hard for people to hear is step 5, the gaze. And I loved what you said about it being almost sending the message that I'm with you. I'm staying with you. Because that is true. I just did it right now. We look around while we're talking, while we're thinking, while we're trying to form our thoughts or figure out how we want to express them. And there is something so meaningful and powerful that when you come back and you can tell that somebody's still there, they're still with you. What a gift. And I just keep thinking how I know I can be doing these things better. So, Emily, will you help us? I don't know if you can demonstrate or give an example or a story of where this 8 steps of deep listening, how it would play out.
Yeah, so let's have an example, and I'll do my best, but maybe I won't do so well, because I think deep listening is something you learn over a lifetime. And I certainly know it's not something I always practice. And I would say, by the way, if I asked you, would you like a cup of tea, and you practiced all those 8 steps, I might just throw the tea back in your face or something. It's not for every single conversation. It's for the conversations that really matter, and for those where we disagree, and also the way we listen to our children. And one thing I should just quickly say about listening to kids is that so often we don't want to stay with the difficult stuff. So when your kid comes home from school and they say, I've had a really bad day and my teacher was really picking on me. And I know I would have said in the past, oh, I'm sure it wasn't like that. I'm sure, she was just treating you equally. I'm sure it wasn't so bad. And all of those things to cheer somebody up, because that's another thing we do when we listen. Whereas in fact, we just need to be able to stay with those difficult feelings. Sounded like you had quite a tough time at school today, huh? And that's all. We're not saying, yes, your teacher picked on you. We're just acknowledging their feelings. And what I have certainly found with my kids is that after staying with the difficult feelings for a while and letting them explore them, they might say something like, yeah, it wasn't actually so bad because I had a great conversation, or, I had a great talk, or I got a nice present from somebody or something else, because they have been heard, rather than say, yeah, when they haven't been heard. So that's so powerful. But hey, let's do a bit of a demonstration, Nicole. So and I should say virtually is harder because I want to look you in the eye. So I'm trying to look at my camera at the top of my laptop screen. But in doing so, I can't see your body language, which I want to see, even though actually body language is not such a reliable indicator. But I want to in order to connect with you. So on the screen, what I try and do is move the image of the person, even shrink it so it's closer to the camera, so I both can look at the camera and look at them more easily. So let me ask you, Nicole, what food reminds you of home?
Manicotti.
So I'm hearing you say manicotti with some enthusiasm.
Yeah, I actually had to think about it for a second because it's, when you say the word home, my brain went to home like as in childhood or home as in now. And I ended up with manicotti because that's what my mom would make for celebrations or big occasions or when we had lots of people over. And it's something I pretend made for my now husband when we first started dating. And the reason I say pretend made is because I actually had my sister make it and claimed it as my own. But we don't eat it a lot now, but it still feels like home to me.
So I'm hearing you say in your childhood home when you were growing up, whenever there was a big celebration or lots of people, that sense of coming together associated with manicotti as a way of drawing people together. And you, on some level, wanted to recreate it with your then boyfriend, now husband, but you weren't able to. But yet it was so important. You got your sister to pretend to make it for you in order to be able to give that same nurturing to him. Is that right?
Yeah, I think, I never really thought about it that way, but I think it is something very early on. He felt very safe and very comfortable for me. And he shows his love through cooking. And it was something I wanted to give back, even though it's not something I'm great at. Cooking is not my skill set. And it's sort of ironic because he's gluten intolerant. He can't eat it anymore. But, it just, it's one of the foods that feels like home. I can actually kind of smell it and taste it. And that's when I knew walking in the door that it was going to be a good family meal or a good experience or something good had happened.
And so I'm hearing you say that when it's very visceral, it's very experiential, that you feel it with all the senses. Even now, as you're talking about it, I'm sensing that you are there in your childhood home and it being a signal of something good happening. And your husband, who conveys love through food, it's something, even though your skill set's not there, you still have the same intention to
Mhm.
do that and to bring that signaling of good to your relationship and to him.
Yeah. Again, I'd never thought about it that way, but I think that's what was unconsciously happening is it was a signal to him, but maybe even more so to myself that this was good and that it was different and safer than anything I'd experienced. Because it's funny, when I describe my relationship with Jay, it does feel like coming home. So, yeah.
That's so beautiful. It's good and safer and coming home. What a beautiful way to describe your relationship. Thank you so much for sharing that, Nicole. We'll finish that little sort of exercise here. But I just want to say, how many questions do you reckon that I asked you roughly there?
Couple, 2 or
Yeah,
3?
just one. I only asked you what food, because if I was asking you questions, I would have asked, what is manicotti? I was thinking this must be a kind of like panicotti, like a milky custard. I hadn't got a clue. But had I gone down that route, we would have talked recipes and you wouldn't have shared so much. And I feel so connected to you now. And I know it's quite emotional with you talking about your husband and that sense of comfort and coming home. And I feel that this deep sense of connection to you and understanding you in the space of 3 minutes. Now, I would say there's ethical things around this because, as you can see, people end up sharing perhaps more they intended. And if you're in a professional context, you need to say, whoa, wait a minute. I just want to stop there and check that you're happy and what how you take that information. It is confidential if it hasn't agreed to be shared. So in my book, I have a whole chapter on the ethical side of things because that's super important. In my book, I've got a chapter on the ethical guidelines around deep listening because people can share more than they mean to. And also, you need to know what you're comfortable bearing because somebody might share more than you're willing to bear or that you can hold. So you need to think around the boundaries of that as well. But that aside, it was really beautiful, the exchange. I don't know, how did you feel, Nicole?
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised at how quickly it felt deep and personal. And, we were talking about something that mattered. You connected to something that probably felt obvious from the outside looking in, but I'd never made that connection before. And what was really interesting, or what is really interesting, and by the way, I'm really glad you mentioned the ethical and confidentiality components of this. I do think that's incredibly important. But I think we often think that the best way to listen is to ask questions. At least that's what I've been told a lot. Practice curiosity. I think a lot of times we link that with asking a lot of questions, and yet you only asked one. So, can you dive a little bit deeper into why asking questions may not always be the best way to make somebody feel truly heard, or even giving advice, which I think is a lot of our natural response? Why do those two things not really help as much as we may think that they do?
First of all, asking questions. As a journalist, I thought my questions were fantastic. I could get to the very core of an issue with my brilliant questions. But what we do when we ask questions, as in that example, had I asked about what wasn't panna cotta, I can't remember.
Manicotti. Yeah, it's okay.
Manicotti.
It's a pasta dish.
It's a pasta dish. Okay,
Yes,
I didn't know that. But manicotti. By asking questions, I take the steering wheel away from you. I decide what avenues we're going to have a conversation around. Whereas when I give it to you and I authentically and open without trying to manipulate you, what I truly understand is what is going on for you. You decide where we go with a conversation, which is why it is so powerful, especially when people aren't often heard, which includes our kids. And particularly if you're a boss at work, the people in your team, it will be surprising for them that you allow them to talk about what really matters. And of course, it's so fantastic because then they surface concerns and ideas which otherwise would remain hidden. With regarding our desire to solve and make things better, what we're doing is coming up with a solution that works for us. And it's not necessarily a solution which works for the other person. And not only that, even if it is a good solution, if you haven't come up with it yourself, you're far less likely to implement it. But if I give you the space to join the dots yourself, you will have done the work and you'll be far more likely to embrace and put into effect whatever solution you come up with. It's yours. You've created it for you.
I think you're dead on. When we ask questions, I should say and be responsible in my communication. When I ask questions, especially in my work, there is a leading component to it. I'm trying to get someone somewhere, or potentially even a manipulation component when I'm talking to somebody with opposing viewpoints, right? Asking questions to try to get them to see the folly of their ways or whatever. And how powerful it is to just simply be curious and allow space for somebody to say and share. I couldn't agree more, and my experience aligns with if it feels like our own idea, we're so much more likely to do something with it. Okay, so my last question is around deep listening, specifically with people who have opposing viewpoints or who you want to punch in the face or who you can't possibly fathom ever agreeing with. How do we do this, and how important is it that we do this?
How we do it, first of all, it is hard. It is truly hard. It is the hardest, which is why I suggest we try, first of all, deep listening to people we agree with and people who we don't have these challenges with. But, listening to people we disagree with isn't only people who think different politically, they might be within our own family as well, and people who we're closest to. Often those are actually hardest to listen to. So, how we do it is be aware that the other person has a reason for believing what they do. One good question to ask is, what is it in your life experience which has led you to believe what you do? Because once somebody shares their life story, we relate to them more as a human being, less than an ideology. And therefore, we find it easier to connect, even if we don't still agree. I think letting go of the feeling that we both need to agree can be really powerful. We don't need to love each other. We want to try and understand them in an open way and listening to ourselves first and realizing what it is about the other person that triggers us so much. Often, when I find if somebody really upsets me or triggers me, it's often not about them, it's often about me.
Mm-hmm.
And when I realize that, I can let it go and be more open to understand them. And it feels really exciting. I should say, when you do that, first listening to somebody who you think has abhorrent ideas and they are able to explain them to you and you feel a connection, it feels powerful. It feels exciting. And it is, I believe, truly important in the world because we know about the scourge of polarization. Even though when we carried out research, for the book, we found out, and this is across the USA with YouGov and More in Common, that people wanted to listen to each other. People wanted to learn to listen to people who think differently. So there is a desire to understand people who are different. And the people who are in the media are often the extremes.
Mm-hmm.
And we tend to have a lot of misinformation about people who vote for the other side. There's a lot of research around that. So we might be making generalizations. We put people in a box rather than to understand their full humanity. And when we open ourselves up, all sorts of things become possible. And we need to work together, I believe, in order to tackle some of the biggest, challenges facing our society and our world.
Yeah, I have a firm belief that there are more things that connect us and that we have in common than separates and divides us. Now, that doesn't sell media, right? So we do see that great polarization. But I loved what you said in that question about what in your history or your life experience has you believing this, I think is what you said, something around those lines. Because I often think if I grew up at that time in that environment, in that town, in that family, what would I believe? And, we're so quick to want to believe that our perspective is right and best. And deep listening, I think, allows for that connection and that space to allow for other possibilities and different perspectives. So I said my last question was going to be my last question, but it triggered another, which is in the 8 steps of deep listening. The second one is listening to yourself first. If you know going into a deep listening opportunity that your intention is to prove or to convince, or if you're just not entering that conversation with a lot of emotional maturity or curiosity or what have you, what would you recommend to stop, to acknowledge, to clean yourself up until you can get to that place before having the conversation? Like, what do we do when if we're being honest with ourselves, know we're not really in the best place or position to practice deep listening?
I think all of the above. I think it is about being authentic if we feel comfortable to say, hey, I really want to listen to you. I'm really curious to understand why you believe what you do. At the same time, I'm noticing a resistance to myself to listen. So can you just give me a moment to center myself so I can be truly open to understand?
Yeah. I mean, how powerful that would be, and what a level of trust I think it would build immediately and create that space for, we're going to have transparent and open communication. And I just demonstrated that in some way. Emily, I often want to read my guests' books, but this is one of the few times where I'm not just going to read it myself. I'm going to give a copy to my husband and even see if my daughter will go through it and practice these 8 steps together. I can see how transformational that will be in my relationships, in my own life, and frankly, for our communities and the world at large. So thank you for being here today. Thank you for writing this book, and thank you for your incredible work.
Well, thank you so much for a really beautiful conversation and for your honesty and transparency too, Nicole.
My absolute pleasure. Okay, friend, the book again is called Deep Listening. Go to bookshop.org or wherever it is that you buy books. Go to your local bookstore. Let's keep them in business. And Emily's website is emilykasriel.com. We'll put that link and all the other links in show notes so you can find and follow her. And at the end of the day, I hope that you're walking away from this conversation not with just ideas, but with a gut level knowing that listening, really listening, is one of the most radical, generous, and transformative things any one of us can do. Not to be liked, not to win an argument, not even to be right, but to understand, to connect, to create space for others to exist, to be heard, and to feel seen. It's not easy, not with our never-ending to-do list, jam-packed schedules, and all the shoulds and the supposed tos. It's especially not easy when emotions run high, opinions clash, and you're 5 seconds away from flipping a table. But it is necessary. We're craving it. And like most things that matter, the best way to receive it is to give it. And let me be real clear. Listening, deep, intentional, honest listening isn't passive or weak. It's powerful. It requires great strength, maturity, and confidence. It's leadership, real leadership, not the ranting, preaching, telling kind we see paraded around for sound bites and clickbait. Deep listening, the kind that creates connection, builds trust, and allows for actual progress, is leadership, love, care, kindness, and connection at their highest forms. And yes, it is also woman's work.
You know the words dominating today's headlines.
Private equity,
generative capital gains tax,
America's chip
fueled by market volatility.
on
Fed rate cuts are
But do you understand how they impact your world and your wallet? In a world that skims the what, understand the why. Because context changes everything. Subscribe at Bloomberg.com.